All right, Happy New Year, folks, and welcome into the Hook'em Hoops podcast. Tommy Yarrish alongside Jason Kinander. Appreciate you guys being with us. Hope everybody had a very happy New Year. Jason and I certainly did, spending some time together in New Orleans watching Texas football. But now that that's over, it's time for Texas hoops, and what a good time to start talking about it with Big 12 play coming up to start the new year. Texas Tech on Saturday in Austin. Jason, a matchup of two first-year head coaches, but very different, I would say, just because Grant McCasland comes over from North Texas. Rodney Terry obviously was essentially the head coach for Texas most of, if not all, last season. When you look at it from that perspective, what do you make of these two coaching staffs here in year one of their tenures?
Well, Tommy, it's a very interesting matchup because it's the storyline is so much different than the last 2 years of Texas versus Texas Tech. 2 years ago, this matchup was one of the most highly anticipated games in the entire college basketball slate, with Chris Beard returning to Lubbock and then the Texas Tech Red Raiders coming into Austin and taking over the Irwin Center at the time, sweeping that series against Chris Beard in his first year at Texas. And then last season, of course, after Beard had been suspended and then fired, it was still a big matchup with Mark Adams on the sideline, Beard's former assistant, still a pretty vicious rivalry between Tech and Texas. This year, it's totally different. You mentioned two first-year head coaches. As a result, this is a much different Texas Tech squad than the one that we've seen the last 2 years. Grant McCasland's teams are built a lot differently than the defense-first Chris Beard, Mark Adams type of squads. So it's a much different-looking Texas Tech team. But with that said, it's a talented team. They're 11-2 with tournament aspirations, all conference caliber players. We'll talk a little bit more about Pop Isaacs in particular in a little bit, because I think that he is the big matchup coming up on Saturday. But it's a good Texas Tech team. It's going to be a competitive game, and two teams that have really played some good basketball against low major schools to tune up for the conference slate.
Yeah, it really is. You and I talked about this before we started recording. It's two unproven Big 12 teams, right? It's a conference that's
Mm.
just so stacked from top to bottom, but you still kind of don't really know who the dogs in this conference are just because they haven't played each other yet. So this is a kind of another, viewpoint or another test I should say for where this Texas team is right now and whether or not this is an NCAA tournament team. They're I think they're right around knocking on the door, I think, at this point of the season, and rightfully so. The last time we saw one of those quote unquote test games was against LSU. They passed that test. Now every game going forward essentially is a test in Big 12 conference play, and we talked about that on the last episode. This Texas Tech team, I mean, Grant McCasland, everywhere that he's gone, he's won, and he's won really well.
Mm.
When you think of North Texas, they're one of the better, excuse me, if not one of the best mid-major programs in college basketball. When he was at the helm, he had guys like Tyler Perry, who absolutely went off last year in the tournament. He beat Purdue while he was at North Texas in the tournament. So it's a really encouraging hire for Texas Tech, considering all the coaching turmoil that they've had the last couple of years with Chris Beard, Mark Adams, and hopefully McCaslin is a guy who is just kind of settled there for a while, and if tradition continues, he's going to win out there in Lubbock. But you're absolutely right, Jason. This game feels completely different than what it's felt the past two seasons. I think these fan bases kind of have run out of things to get mad at each other for in basketball. So I don't know if it's going to be as heated as it's been in years past, but nonetheless, it's still a really good game. When you think of Grant McCasland teams, you think of really good defense and slowing the game down. This is a guy who has had top 50 defenses the last 3 years at North Texas, and they're 27th in the country right now, and they play to slow the game down. So that's the most interesting part of this matchup for me, Jason, is Texas loves to play fast. Texas Tech wants to just suck the energy out of the game. They want to suck the speed out of the game and slow you down and make it a real grind out. So I think, if Texas plays fast like they like to do and get to the bucket quick, score in transition, things like that, then this could be a game where they win fairly comfortably. You could say any game if they play like that, they win comfortably. But if they're slowed down and kind of have to operate out of the half court offense, then, maybe it depends on whether or not shots are falling. And a lot of times this year, those shots have not been falling. So that's what makes this game interesting to me. I think it comes down to that pace of play. Who has better control of the pace in this game? What do you think?
I completely agree. I think the pace of play is going to be interesting. This is a game that's going to be played at a very slow pace. Texas's defense has started to find itself a little bit in the last couple of games. They've allowed 99 combined points in the last two games. One of those games, they only allowed 37 points to UNC Greensboro. So Texas defense is starting to hit its stride a little bit. As you explained, it's a Texas Tech defense that is always good under Grant McCasland. His defenses are always in the top 50. This year, Texas Tech, like you noted, is 27th in total defense. So it's going to be a slow pace of game. But there are technically three matchups in this one that I think will define the way that the game goes. And the first of those matchups is the guard play. I think that these are two of the best two-headed monster duos at guard in the conference between Max Abmas and Tyrese Hunter, who have both been playing good basketball in the past month, and then Pop Isaacs and Joe Toussaint, who have been playing good basketball all season. And so those two players for each teams complement each other very well. Pop Isaacs is sort of a do-it-all guard. He can score off the bounce. He can attack the rim. Joe Toussaint leads the team in assists. Fifth-year senior guard. He's on his third school. So, Texas Tech, their two guards set there. It's a team that always has good guards, but this year, those are two guys who have the potential to go into Austin, control the pace of the game, play good defense because it is a mismatch defensively, technically on Abmas and Hunter, and potentially affect the game. The other matchup that really intrigues me in this one is Texas Tech, and this is a team a lot like Texas, is built off of transfers, built off of first-year players in the program. And so one of those first-year players for Texas Tech is Warren Washington, another guy who's on his third stop, a transfer from Arizona State, fifth-year senior. He's averaging 9 rebounds per game. He's a guy who has never attempted a three-pointer in his career. So they look to get the ball inside to him. Traditionally, Texas has struggled with those traditional bigs, but I think it's going to be different this time around with the healthy Su, healthy Shedric. I think Texas is going to be able to neutralize Warren Washington, push the Texas Tech offense out to the perimeter, and force the only way for make sure that the only way that they can lose is if Texas Tech is knocking down tough perimeter shots, which is the weakness of this Red Raiders team. So I think if the game is played at a slow pace, that probably advantages Texas. But the matchup down low with Washington against Shedric and Su, both of which have struggled at times defensively, both of which are still getting healthy. You hope that they're fully healthy now that we're past the first of the year. But those are the two, maybe three matchups in this game that really intrigue me. Tommy, what do you think?
You kind of led me into my question for you. Is it time to just let Su and Shedrick go? Have they reached a point where they're healthy
Yeah.
enough to just kind of take off those restrictions and, just really cut the chains loose? Because they need to do it at some point. I mean, and yes, you want to ramp those guys up and make sure they're healthy. Obviously, that's number one, that's paramount no matter when it is in the season. But if you want to win basketball games, you're going to have to let those two guys loose. So when are we going to see that? Is it on Saturday? Is it later in Big 12 conference play? I think that the sooner the better, obviously, but it's a question of just how healthy are these guys. And I think Rodney Terry hasn't shown his cards just yet, so maybe Saturday gives us a better idea. But like you mentioned, with Warren Washington down low, it is going to be a big test for Dylan Disu and Caden Shedrick of their health and of their interior defense. I think Shedrick and Disu match up very well in that scenario, but Warren Washington has been playing great basketball defensively. Leads the team in rebounds and in blocks, and that's what he was brought in to do. When you think of a Graham McCasland team, Warren Washington or some type of Warren Washington player is going to be on a team 10 out of 10 times. So this is a
Yep.
guy who perfectly fits into the system. It's one of McCasland's guys from the portal, so I honestly think he might be their second best player alongside Joe Toussaint from West Virginia. I think he is by far their best player. I know you mentioned Pop Isaacs. What concerns me about Isaacs is his efficiency. He scores, but he shoots too many shots. Not they're only shooting 35.7% from the field. So that kind of concerns me a little bit there, but he's come along really well from West Virginia. Toussaint has. I think he's their best offensive weapon. He averages over 14 a game. He's shooting 46 from the field, over 33% from three, 88% at the line as well. So I think he has a chance to
Mm.
turn some heads in Big 12 play this year. But I think you're right. That matchup of the guards is going to be very important, especially defensively. They get Tyrese Hunter back in this game. He missed the game against UT Arlington with the flu. And before that, against UNC Greensboro, he had arguably his best game of the season, maybe his best game. I wouldn't say his best game as a Longhorn, but He goes for 23 points. He's playing fast and he played confident. And that's what we wanted to see out of Tyrese Hunter. We talked about it a little while ago.
Mm.
And then their best defensive performance of the year as well. Jason, you were pretty high on UNC Greensboro, and Texas held them to their lowest scoring output so far of the season. They scored more against Arkansas than they did against Texas. So I think that's a testament to maybe Rodney Terry is finally starting to get this defense under helm. And,
Mm.
you probably want a little bit of a better showing in the first half against UT Arlington. But they come out in the second half and outscore them by 10 points as well to grow on that, and they win by 17. So overall, I think this is a matchup that benefits Texas just because it is a first year for Grant McCastle, and I think he needs some time, like any first year head coach does, to sort of establish the culture, to get his system in there, to get his guys in there. But Texas Tech can be really good, and I think they are going to be really good under McCaslin with some time. And there are probably going to be a couple of games this year where they steal from other Big 12 teams because, frankly, this on some nights, especially in Lubbock, with how good of a home court advantage they have, is going to be a game that some Big 12 teams aren't going to want to play.
Yeah, and I want to circle back to your question about Shedric and Dessou. You said, when does Texas finally let them loose? This is a perfect game for it, Tommy. We talk about Warren Washington, but he is truly the only natural big in the rotation for Grant McCasland. Last year, Texas Tech had some of the best bigs in the conference, in Daniel Bacho, who now plays for Louisiana Tech, and Fardaws Amack, who now plays for Cal. And so if Texas wants to get their bigs going, wants to use their size advantage to their advantage, this is the perfect game for it. And so we talk about the guard play. The guard play will define the season for Texas. It's going to be a big role in every single game. But if there's a game where the bigs are really going to take over, I think it might be this one. Another note on the Texas Tech team, you mentioned that Washington's probably their second best player. In my opinion, their second best player about a month ago was Devin Cambridge. He is now out for the season. So that is another aspect of this game that I think is going to play into it. This is a deeper Texas team than the Texas Tech team that's coming into town. Now, with that being said, as we begin to preview the game, and I'll ask for your prediction after I give mine, one thing that very much scares me about this game is it reminds me of a scenario last season when the Kansas State Wildcats, who were a little underguarded, a little, not talked about as much as they were by the end of the season, came into Austin, and let's see, it's January 4th. You're still in Houston. I'm still in Chicago. We don't start school for another 2 weeks. That Big 12 opener last year, it was a similar scenario. Everyone was on winter break. It was kind of a dead crowd. The Moody Center wasn't very much of a home court advantage. And Marquise Noel in Kansas State walked into the Moody Center and lit up Texas. That was their worst defensive performance of the year. Marquise Noel, a little guard like Pop Isaacs, just did whatever he wanted, threw the ball all over the court, shot it from anywhere on the court, hit every shot that he took. That's the thing that kind of scares me going into this is it's two good teams who match up pretty well together, play similar styles of basketball, but it's not much of a home court advantage. So if Texas doesn't make the shots that they usually do, this is a game that Texas Tech can steal. With that being said, my prediction for this game is I do think the Longhorns will start the conference slate 1-0. I think that this will be a slow game to start out in the first half, but defense carries, and defense has looked good for Texas in these last 2 weeks. You have to look back at the UNC Greensboro game. They allowed 37 total points. I think that Texas's defense is going to continue to grow. You mentioned that Tyrese Hunter has played some of his best basketball in a Texas uniform these past couple of weeks. I really look back to that LSU game as a good example of what Tyrese Hunter can do when he's playing his best ball. I think he's going to be the difference. Asmus will have a nice game. The Bigs will have a nice game, but I'm predicting a big game for Tyrese Hunter. I think Texas is actually going to pull out and win this game by double figures towards the end. I think it's going to be close for about the first 30 minutes, but given the way that Texas has looked the last few weeks, it's a balanced team. All five starters are now averaging double figures. Players are getting confidence. I don't really see a way, unless they miss their open shots and the interior defense struggles like it did against UConn, like it did against Marquette. Now, that was a Marquette team that Texas had a size advantage against, so there's a chance that this could happen against Texas Tech. But at the end of the day, I think that Texas is starting to click, starting to get their feet under them. Roles are being defined on this team. Players are getting healthy. I've got the Longhorns by double figures. Tommy, what's your prediction?
As you guys know by now, we've partnered with BetMGM Sportsbook for this college basketball season. We're going to be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks and predictions throughout the college basketball season. And we are going to have special offers for you, the listeners and the viewers on the Field of 68 each and every week during the season. If you haven't signed up with BetMGM yet, use the bonus code FIELD1500 and you will get up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager on BetMGM Sportsbook. Here's what you got to do. Download the BetMGM app. Sign up using the bonus code FIELD1500. Deposit at least $10 and place your first wager on any game. You will receive up to $1,500 in bonus bets if that bet loses. Just make sure you use the bonus code FIELD1500 when you sign up. And remember, BetMGM is now available under one wallet in select states. As a New Jersey resident, this is super convenient for me when I have to go cover games in New York or Philly. When crossing state borders, just log into your existing account instead of having to create new accounts in each state that you go to. And most importantly, I got to let you know, we do have some fun stuff coming up for this college basketball season. Bet insurance tokens, college hoops odds boosts, my personal favorite, parlay odds boosts. So download the BetMGM app today.
Well, was a good point about the not so much having a home court advantage with nobody back on campus. I didn't even think about that. But um, when comparing this game to last year's Kansas State game, it's an accurate comparison, but I don't think the teams are similar in the sense of Texas Tech's offense is not at the prowess that Kansas State was. We mentioned Marquise Noel and Pop Isaacs, yeah, a similar build in the sense that he's a smaller guard who can shoot the ball at a high clip, but I just don't see that kind of performance coming from the Red Raiders offensively on Saturday. But I do think they keep this game close. I'm really high on Grant McCasland as a coach. I loved him at North Texas. I love what they were able to do, building that Mean Green program up from essentially the ground up and making it one of the better mid majors in college basketball. I was reading the almanac about them earlier today, and Rob Douster compared them to the mid-major version of Virginia, and I think that's a very accurate comparison. Defensive teams that slow the game down, but they can beat you and they can beat you bad. And this is a very dangerous Texas Tech team because if they catch fire at the right time, they can wreak havoc. And like I mentioned earlier, they're going to be a team on other people's schedules where you look at it and say, yeah, I'm really not looking forward to this game because it's going to be physical, it's going to be hard fought, and that you're going to have to grind it out. Texas has been in a couple of those grinded out games. I think that UConn game would kind of be a good example of that. That Louisville game is a good example of that. And if we're talking those two games, they're 1-1 in that stretch. I think Texas Tech is on the same level of defense that those two teams were, if not better. So how do the Longhorns fare maybe if the game is slowed down, operating in a half-court offense, even if Tyrese Hunter and Max Abmas have been playing some of their better basketball as of late? If those shots aren't falling, it's not going to matter. So that's kind of what concerns me about this game, but I do still think Texas finds a way to win this one. I don't think it's by double digits. I think it's fairly narrow. I'm not saying it's going to come down to a buzzer beater or last possession or anything, but this is going to be a hard-fought game. It's going to be a slugfest, I think, a matchup of two teams with very different but yet somewhat similar styles of play. It's going to be a very defensive game in my mind. I don't think you're going to see the offensive fireworks that you usually see with these two teams, just because they've had so many good players who can light it up over the last couple of years. So I think it's a grinded out type of game. I think Texas wins it by, I'll say, 5.
Okay. So your prediction is Texas by 5. I have Texas by 10. We both have Texas winning. So we will continue to keep track of our game-by-game predictions now that conference play is underway. We're going to touch a little bit more on the Big 12 before we get out of here. But there is something outside of the conference that I feel like we should touch on because it's quickly becoming one of the biggest stories in college basketball, and there are obvious Texas ties here. Tommy, what do you make of Chris Beard's Ole Miss Rebels starting out 13-0, their best start in school history, a transfer-laden squad that is becoming close to being a lock for the NCAA tournament unless they really melt down in conference play? They open up against number 5 Tennessee. That'll be a fantastic game this weekend. Tommy, what do you think about Chris Beard's start at Ole Miss? And bigger question, what do you think this year's Texas team would look like if Chris Beard was still the head coach?
Well, that's a loaded question, isn't it? I think it's very impressive what Chris Beard has done, but it doesn't come as much of a surprise to me just because everywhere Chris Beard has gone, he has won. He won at Texas Tech. He won at Texas, even when he wasn't there. His team won, and now he's winning again at Ole Miss. I think the biggest test for them, obviously, is on Saturday against Tennessee. He knows Rick Barnes. He's played against Rick Barnes. What does that look like in a first year team with a lot of players that aren't necessarily his guys, I would say. That's the most impressive thing about it is he's won all these games with a team that isn't necessarily his, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that to me speaks to how good he is as a head coach. But the real test comes on Saturday because Tennessee is a program in and of itself. I think is the perfect way to describe it. Rick Barnes does things his way, and the Volunteers are really good at it. But it is very impressive what Ole Miss has done, and I think Chris Beard. You can say what you want about him, but when it comes to basketball, he is a great head coach. He wins games, and that's what people want. Um, and when it comes to how good Texas would be if they still had him, I mean, I think they would be very good. I think that this is still a really good team, but I don't want to slight Rodney Terry at all here. I think he's got a very bright future. A lot of people have had some takes about him as a head coach. I'm very high on the Rodney Terry train. You might as well call me the conductor. I think he's a fantastic head coach. I think he's going to do great things for Texas basketball. He's a phenomenal recruiter. You look at this 2024 class they're bringing in, and that kind of tips the hat to that. You could say, oh, well, Ron Holland. Well, I think Ron Holland was kind of always going pro. I think that was less of a Rodney Terry thing and more of a Ron Holland realizing that he probably is the number one overall pick in this upcoming NBA draft. But um, again, very impressive what Chris Beard has done. And yes, Texas would still be a very good team if he was still the head coach, because this would be what, year 3 of Chris Beard. And so, once you kind of hit that point, always an upward trajectory no matter what. But in year 3, things really could have continued to take off, and especially with this roster.
I'll tell you my only regret about Chris Beard not being the Texas head coach, because I agree, not slighting Rodney Terry. He's done a great job, especially recruiting, building up the culture. The thing that I wish would have happened if Chris Beard is still the head coach is I wish that he would have brought Jamarion Sharp to Texas, one of my favorite players in the country. 7'5", big, 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 one of the biggest blocking players in the country, fun guy. I mean, just the type of player that you love to see on your basketball team. And you're right, like, it's not a team with Chris Beard's typical guys. Like, he usually doesn't operate with bigs like that. There are returning players from this Ole Miss team like Matthew Murrell, who probably wouldn't be there if Chris Beard didn't come back, but he's not one of Beard's guys. And they're 11-0 after their best start in school history. So just felt like we should have touched upon that, because especially if the Rebels beat Tennessee this weekend to start out 12-0, they will officially be on national radar. And then people are going to start talking about, oh, did Texas prematurely fire Chris Beard, or should they have given him a second chance? Those are conversations that we will not be having on this show, but just know those conversations will happen if Ole Miss starts out 12-0. Now, one more note before we get out of here is Texas has a pretty easy conference slate for the first couple of games. And so, Tommy, I would like to ask you, and I'll go down the list of their first 5 conference games. I want to know when you think the first loss is going to come for Texas. And so now let me read off to you their first 5 I gotta stop saying non-conference. Getting like mentally trained
Yeah,
to saying that past
it
couple.
is. Yeah, it's weird.
So their first 5 conference games, we have Texas Tech on Saturday, in Cincinnati on Tuesday, in West Virginia next Saturday. UCF comes to the Moody Center on the 17th, and then Texas hosts Baylor on the 20th. Of those 5 games, if any, which do you foresee being Texas's first loss of the conference play season?
This is hard because it really could be any of the Big 12 is so odd because, I almost want to answer this question after the Texas Tech game so we know what this team looks like in Big 12 play. But I look at that away stretch and I could see them dropping one of those two games. Now, granted, Cincinnati and West Virginia are certainly bottom half Big 12 teams, but bottom half Big 12 teams are very good teams. And I hope people understand that. This is truly the best conference in college basketball. And so even if a team finishes, 10th or ninth in the conference, they're still really good. And that could be a tournament team come the end of the season.
Hmm?
So um, I'm going to say, I think I'm going to take the comfortable pick. I think Baylor is that first loss. It's no secret that I'm really high on Scott Drew and what they're building over there. I love Jacoby Walter, and he's got an up and down season, but very proven commodity for them as a freshman. So I'm going to say Baylor is that first loss on January 20th. And if that's the case, I mean, a 4-1 start in Big 12 play would be fantastic for Texas. And if they win that Baylor game and they go 5-0, well, then some smoke starting to run around Austin. I think they're really finding their heat, and they enter the tournament conversation again.
I'm not ready to go on record and predict this being their first loss of the conference play season, but one game that really raises my eyebrows is that road trip to Morgantown. You mentioned that those are bottom of the barrel Big 12 teams, but that's a weird road trip going to Cincinnati and West Virginia. I mean, that's just kind of unconventional. And it's a Cincinnati team that Texas doesn't match up incredible with. They score with their bigs. And so Texas has traditionally struggled with that under Rodney Terry. And then headed to West Virginia. It's quickly becoming a lost season in Morgantown, but it's a rabid fan base at WVU, and those fans will show out for a team like Texas. So potentially the last time that the Longhorns are ever rolling into Morgantown. So it's going to be a raucous environment and a good, it's a West Virginia team with good veteran pieces. Raekwon Battle has been one of the best players in the country, even though he hasn't won. But since coming back, his first 4 games, he's averaging like 26 points per game, which is like unheard of in high major basketball. So that might be where I put my first loss. But for now, I'm going to agree with you that it'll probably come at that Baylor game. And if they start out 4-1 or 5-0 in conference play, one, they'll be firmly back in the tournament picture, even though it is early. And even more importantly, they'll be firmly in the Big 12 championship picture. And so a lot will be determined in these first couple of games of the season. Texas might not be playing very many contenders, but we'll get a good taste of what this Longhorn team looks like, especially for a team who didn't play against a lot of high major opponents in their non-conference slate.
Jason, before I just, you mentioned the first 5 games of the tournament, and I'm looking at their schedule. Listen to this. After that Baylor game, at Oklahoma, at BYU versus Houston, at TCU versus Iowa State, all in the span of like 2 weeks. I mean, that is just brutal. What a stretch. If they split that even, if they go like 3-3 in that stretch, that would be beyond impressive, in my opinion. I mean, that is a gauntlet. Like, this conference is so good from top to bottom. And, you look at the AP rankings, and you've got number 11 Oklahoma, number 12 BYU, number 3 Houston right now. TCU and Iowa State could very well be top 25 teams by the time those games roll around. I know TCU just had a tough loss, but um, man, that's just looking at that is like, or I'm sorry, TCU hasn't lost since Nevada. I don't know what I'm blabbering on about, but they have Kansas on Saturday. I think that's a loss for the Horned Frogs. Nonetheless, just a brutal stretch.
Brutal stretch. And they finish off February with 3 out of 4 games on the road. First in Houston, second in Lawrence, third in Lubbock. I mean, this is an absolute
Jeez.
gauntlet of a conference season stretch. The easiest stretch is these first 5 games. So we'll see. We'll learn a lot about this Texas team. Big 12 play opener is on Saturday against Texas Tech. I have the Horns by 10. Tommy has the Horns by 5. We will see how it plays out. We will be here to recap that game, preview the Longhorns' next game against Cincinnati. That game is next Tuesday, January 9th on the road, the Longhorns road opener in the Big 12. But that'll be all for us for now. Tommy, thank you very much for joining me. Again, Happy New Year to all of our listeners and watchers at home. We hope you enjoy the game on Saturday. We'll be with you